What are the properties of objects? So when you came into class, there was an object on each lab table and my front lab table. You and a partner worked together to describe each object in as much detail as possible. The 6 objects were a hot pink balloon, rubber tubing that was flexible, a metal rod, a tennis ball, a clear plastic pyramid, and a beaker of hopefully ice water. After that, we talked about not so much the descriptions, but the categories of things that you described. So the characteristics of each item that you picked out. So hopefully some of these you saw. Okay, obviously some of these you aren't able to use your 5 senses, and hopefully you didn't taste any of the objects. But you guys did look at the color. The metal rod was shiny. They were all different weights, so different mass, different shapes. So the ice water was cold. I didn't want you guys to see a variety of characteristics. Okay, so this is where we talked about those categories. So you guys worked in table groups to try to find 2 or 3 categories that described those characteristics. A lot of people here said physical or chemical properties. People came up with quantitative and qualitative, and those were all good. So then we tried something. So I had candy, and I asked you to make your prediction. Okay, you predicted what properties would change and what properties would stay the same. Not everyone had the same predictions, and that's okay. We then actually watched, okay, and then we tried to take the properties that did change and the properties that didn't change and sort them into 2 categories. Here, the hint was, where do these properties come from? Okay, what makes these properties exist? Okay, so we were trying to use that and sort them into whether they changed or not when I crushed the candy. So not everyone came up with intrinsic and extrinsic. So these were a little bit harder to come up with because they're not as obvious, okay? So in chemistry, you might have talked about this, all right? And this list here, or these 2 lists, are more properties of matter than properties of objects, okay? So the density of matter doesn't change. It's an intrinsic to whatever that material is. But if I have a tennis ball, okay, and tomorrow we'll talk more about the difference between systems and objects. If I have this tennis ball, that mass isn't changing. So if I'm treating it as an object, I could actually say that the mass is intrinsic to that object. Okay, so this list is for matter, and so we'll have to be careful when we talk about objects as we get going. Okay, so don't just memorize these lists, okay? But they are here for properties of matter. Okay, so what you actually specifically need to know about in this AP course are mass, electric charge and resistivity, density, volume, and weight. The first 3 are actually mentioned in the curriculum framework in terms of properties that objects and materials have. Density, volume, and weight. All right, you'll notice those are all related to mass, and so we'll deal with those as we get further along in the course. So the daily summary, okay, objects can be described by their properties, which can be either intrinsic, okay, so that means they don't change based on the size or the location, okay, or extrinsic, so when they do depend on other things. So also, we can talk about an object as one thing, even if it has internal structure. I know we're not maybe as comfortable with that one yet, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow when we talk about the difference between objects and systems. Okay, there is no homework slide in this presentation because there is none, but don't forget that today is the recommended completion date for your 4 mastery quizzes.